Welcome to TeamLab. I'll be talking on the introduction to anatomy. This isn't just about knowing the number of bones in the body or the amount of blood in the body, with understanding the concepts of anatomy. And we'll be looking at the types, the language of anatomy, laterality. So now, what is anatomy? Anatomy is derived from two Greek words, which means to cut apart, or another word that can be used is dissection. We also have prosection or sectioning, and this is cutting apart the body to view structures and study them, then compare them with others, the relationships with others. That's what anatomy is all about. So now let's look at the types of anatomy. The first one that I'll be talking on is systemic anatomy. And systemic anatomy is the study of the human body's organ systems and their complex function. There are about 11 systems in our body. We have the endocrine system, the reproductive system, the muscular system, the skeletal system, and lots more. So study of each of these systems is known as systemic anatomy. So moving on, let's another type of anatomy that we'll talk about is regional anatomy. Regional anatomy. And this is the study of the human body's major parts such as the head, neck, pelvis, perineum, and all. That's dividing the body into various regions to study. You can start from the upper limb or the lower limb. That's regional anatomy. And under regional, there's surface anatomy, which is the study of surface markings of the body. Now moving on, we also have clinical anatomy. Clinical anatomy. So clinical anatomy, this is like the incorporation of regional and systemic anatomy. It's like the reverse thinking. Instead of thinking that okay, what is the function of this muscle, then you would be thinking that if this muscle were to be absent, then what effects would it cause, or how would it manifested that this particular muscle is absent or cut. Now let's look at classifications based on structure. We have the gross anatomy, and this is a study of structures that can be seen with naked eyes, such as gross anatomy of the head, of the neck, of the lower limbs, of the upper limbs, of the kidney, liver, lungs, and all. We also have the microscopic anatomy. And microscopic anatomy is the study of structures that can't be seen with the naked eyes and requires microscope. And there are two types of microscopic anatomy. We have histology, which is the study of tissues, and cytology, which is the study of cells. So moving on, we will be looking at the language of anatomy. Early anatomists found anatomical description hard due to the various positions that the human body could take. Therefore, there was a need to create a standard position as reference, which we call the anatomical position. And this is the anatomical position that we're looking at. Standing upright, the face forward and palms forward as well. The feet is parallel and shoulder width apart. Now we'll be looking at anatomical planes, and these planes are imaginary lines in which sectioning is made across to view and study the structures of the human body. The first plane we'll be looking at is the sagittal plane, and this can be subdivided into two. We have the mid-sagittal plane, which is also known as the median plane, as well as the parasagittal. That is it's a vertical plane which is used for comparing the upper and lower parts of the body as well as the front and back, and it's longitudinal. Another plane that we're looking at is the coronal plane, also known as the frontal plane. This is a vertical plane as well and is used for comparing the left and right body parts such as the kidney as well as the upper and lower body parts. It divides the body into front and back. The next plane that we'll be looking at is the transverse plane. and this is also called the horizontal plane or the axial plane, and divides the body into lower and upper parts. Is used for comparing the front and back as well as the left and right body parts. And this transverse plane is majorly used, is the most clinically used as medical images. Now let's look at directional terms. So the first term that we'll be looking at is the anterior and the posterior. From the diagram, you can see that anterior means towards the front and posterior towards the back, such as the nose and the neck. You can see that the nose is anterior to the neck, while the neck is posterior to the nose because towards the back, while the nose is towards the front. And another word for anterior is ventral, and for posterior, dorsal. Rostral, which is also means anterior, is used when describing the brain or parts of the brain. For example, you can say that the frontal lobe is rostral to the cerebellum. So that's when you use the word rostral. Now another directional term that we'll be looking at is the inferior and the superior. So it can also mean cranial and caudal, superior towards the head and inferior towards the tail. A good example is the head is superior to the abdomen and the abdomen is inferior to the head. So now the parts that we're talking of, those are for the axial skeleton. For the appendicular, which are our lower and upper limbs, we have another directional terms for describing them, and they are proximal and distal. So proximal means closer to the trunk or origin, and distal means farther from the trunk or origin. Now this is a picture of the bones of the lower limb. You can see the femur, then we have the tibia and the fibula. So you can see that the femur is proximal to the tibia and the tibia is distal to the femur, in the sense that the femur, which is the biggest bone in the body, the hip bone, is closer to the trunk or origin. So those are the terms used to describe appendicular parts of the body. Other directional terms that we can look at is the medial, lateral, and intermediate. Medial towards the midline, then lateral away from the midline, and intermediate between the medial and lateral. A good example is the nose. The nose is medial to the ears and the ear is lateral to the nose, while the eyes are intermediate, that is medial to the ears and lateral to the nose. Another directional term that we'll look at is the superficial and deep. Superficial meaning closer to the surface, and deep, which is deep into the body. Now this diagram is a very good example. You can see the skin, the skull, the brain as well. The brain is deep to the skull and the skull is deep to the skin, while the skin is superficial to the brain and superficial to the skull as well, and the skull is superficial to the brain. Now, there are situations whereby there is a need to use more than one directional term to describe a particular organ in the body. So, for example, the ear. The ear is posterior and lateral to the nose. You would combine the two directional terms and say that the ear is posterolateral to the nose. Nearby, this brings for more specificity. Now, we'll be looking at laterality. Paired structures having left and right members are bilateral, such as the kidneys. We also have unilateral, and these are located only on one side, such as the spleen and the heart. We also have structures that occur on the same sides and they are called ipsilateral, such as the right thumb and the right toe. Then structures that occur on the opposite side relative to each other are contralateral, such as the left and right hands, or the left and right legs as well. They are contralateral. Now let's look at a few practice questions. The first one, the femur is attached to the tibia. You can pause the video and answer it yourself. So the femur is dashed to the tibia, is proximal to the tibia. Another question, the brain is dashed to the skull. The brain is deep to the skull. Then the right leg is dashed to the left leg. You call that contralateral. Then the shoulder is dashed to the neck, lateral. The shoulder is lateral to the neck. Also have the rectum is dashed to the vagina. The rectum is posterior to the vagina. And we have the heart is dashed to the bladder. The heart is superior to the bladder. And this brings us to the end of this lecture. I hope you've been able to grasp the concept of anatomy. Thank you.